Hello, I'm Christopher McGee. Welcome to the Making of a Moore Marriage and Family by the Moore Society Incorporated. This particular video is created to address a very important concern of mine. I am a school teacher by trade. Been teaching for a minute. My background is English, social studies, health, physical education, and special education. Most of my work experience is special education. And although I've worked with students, although I've taught school from young people, working with young people, elementary school on up, most of my time has been spent at the high school level, dealing with pubescent and adolescent males and females. As you can imagine, being at a high school, listening to young people go back and forth about relationships and dating and love and romance, and you hear a lot of things, some positive, some negative, some healthy, some outright perverse. I wanted to create a recording addressing a very important issue, and that is a lot of the negativity, the negative feelings and attitudes that young Black American girls had about relationships. Now, when it comes to relationships, much of what young people know or think they know is based on what they see on television, interacting with family and friends. A lot of it takes shape around socialization, society, the examples being set. But I wanted to talk about perspective. A lot of the ideas that young people have in their head are Eurocentric. That is, European, white folk. We live in America. Our educational system is based on European philosophy. The whole science and approach to education is European. We live in a society greatly influenced by those of European descent. A lot of ideas communicated on television and books and magazines have all long been Caucasian. And for those who haven't been taught, you may not even know there's a difference. Okay, then. We're white folk. There's a white folk way of thinking. And you as young people know there's black folk way of thinking. This video is specifically for pubescent and adolescents. Take heed and try to follow me. White folk being European. If you were to ask someone, say, what's the opposite of a man? Their knee-jerk response would be a woman. But yet if you ask that person to explain how are men and women opposites, they couldn't. They would struggle trying to put two and two together. They say that men and women are opposites because that's what they've heard all their lives. You hear it in television show, you hear it in movies, you hear it in school, and this is the programming, that men and women are opposites. Well, that comes from white folk. Among white folk, it's understood that men are from Mars, women are from Venus, two totally different sexes. And because they're so totally different, that there's nothing but challenge and conflict between them. White people traditionally embrace the conflict theory. What is the conflict theory? The conflict theory is that it is the nature of things to clash. That conflict is the nature of relationships, the nature of how everything functions, how it operates. Division, It is common thinking that men and women are supposed to live in conflict. That two opposing forces come together, one suppresses the other, or they learn to compromise. And that this is nature. This is the natural order of the world, the natural order of people, the natural order of life. So everything for white people is rooted in conflict. It's the very nature of how they see. Through the conflict theory, men and women are supposed to live in conflict. And with that conflict, in the eyes of white people, come advancement. Two teams, their opponents, they work together, they're competing with each other, and through competition, they learn to work and get better and improve and advance. And that this is nature, this is essential, this is the way things work. So when you hear on TV, you see TV shows and movies, and you see white people, and you hear ideas about men and women having no trust. Well, that's the nature of conflict. With conflict being the nature of the relationship, as white folks will have it, you're supposed to live in fear. You're supposed to have bitterness, anger, frustration. You're supposed to have ideas of conspiracies, secrecy. Distrust and discord falls in line with such conflict. To see relationships and understand that conflict is the nature, this is where so much of that comes from. Conflict theory falls in line with the nature in which man sees himself. White folk, when you look at psychology, they see the quintessential man as a Tasmanian devil, a wild beast roaming the earth. And through interacting with other human beings in conflict and frustration, they fight, they war, till one people suppress the other, enslave the other, or they learn to compromise and work together. This turmoil, white people believe, is natural, even for an individual. To live every day in turmoil within yourself is understood to be natural. That you're supposed to live in conflict. There's supposed to be a good angel on one shoulder and a bad angel on the other, and you're supposed to be in conflict and and the struggle in life is supposed to be, how does the good suppress the bad, or how does the bad overwhelm the good? And this becomes the basis of how men and women are supposed to think, how they're supposed to function. White folk thinking is different. It's different like that. The idea that the primary motivations for man is pleasure and pain. That this wild beast, this Tasmanian devil roaming the countryside, lives for his pleasures, but every day is haunted by his pain. And that this struggle between pleasure and pain define who we are. This is white folk thinking. The conflict theory, men and women are totally different. And the whole idea of pleasure and pain being the basis of who and what we are. There's a long-standing joke among white folk. White folks say it takes 3 people to make a marriage work: the husband, the wife, and the marriage counselor. Because it's understood in their world that there's supposed to be distrust, that men and women are supposed to despise each other. You start looking at old literature with white folk, you learn about the Amazon women, all the females living together, despising men. Then you look at the Spartans, In their culture where males and females live separate and only got together pretty much to mate and reproduce. This whole stress and strain that is recognized as natural is not natural. That's just the way white folks see the world. Conflict is the basis of everything. Republican versus Democrat, black against white, rich against the poor, the church versus the state. Everything's about conflict. Even the beginning of all things started with a big bang. Woo! Big bang. Conflict, explosion, outbursts. This is where white folk live. This is how they think. They don't see slavery the way you do. They won't come out and say it. They won't come out and say it, but in their culture, if white people are able to suppress black people, that's nature. If you permit yourself to be enslaved, that's your fault. Because that's the way white people see the world. And that's why even in America, I mean, white folk, for the sake of it's not for being politically correct, will tell you how wrong slavery is. But look at the gassing of Jews. Look at the South African apartheid. Look at colonization. Look at slavery right here in America. Slavery that gave rise to segregation. It gave rise to racial profiling. I mean, we live in a world where all throughout history, white folk has shown you that they have a way of seeing the world that falls in line with the nature of who and what they are, and it's a given. When white people look at America, they see a country that's younger than most countries. The history of European countries are much, much older than America, but America became a superpower in a very short period of time, and it was done so by the exploitation of Africans and the exploitation of women. And even though white folk might say, oh, that's so sad, oh, it shouldn't have been that way, deep down, there's a glow. There's pride. Because no matter what they done, because in their culture, the end justifies the means, and the fact that America's a great country means that, well, maybe we didn't do the best things to get here, but what the hell, we're here now, what the hell? That's white folk. You need to understand that's white folk. And so if you grow up thinking in terms of relationships like white folk, that men and women are opposites, that men and women are two totally different beings, then that's like traveling down the same path as white folk. They drive over 2 miles up the road, you drive 2 miles. They make a left, you make a left. They make a right, you make a right. They go over here and off a cliff, you go over here and off a cliff, because you're following their lead. Now, but you got to get your mind right. And this is the most important thing. You black men and women, young men, y'all got to get your mind right. Because that is for white folk. White folk thinking, European philosophy for white folk. We are black people. And we are considerably different. What we recognize as a people is that all men and women come from the earth. God, a true and living God of love, created a man in his image. Went to Mother Earth, and from her womb to clay, breathed life into that clay, that form, gave life to a man. And then a God of love, a creator, nurtured that man, nurtured his mind and his heart, led him to address the garden, mapping out the garden, mapping out Eden, marking every plant, every hill, every dip, every creek, every river. And then when time came, he was brought the animals. He named the animals. And as his mind and his heart took shape, And he was able to take responsibility. His majesty gave him dominion of the earth and all of its inhabitants. And when the time was right and he was no longer good to be alone, his majesty put him fast to sleep and created a woman. But he didn't create a separate lump of soil to make woman. No, he took man, the flesh, the bone, the blood of man, and created woman, the womb of man. From him, for him, to evolve into God through him. They were made for each other. One flesh. Men and women are not opposites. We were created to connect heart, mind, body, and soul. It takes a man and a woman to create a whole human being, hence procreation. It takes a man and a woman to make a baby. The human family relies on this connection, this bond. Without this bond, there would be no people. Every man and woman walking the face of this earth only exists because of the sacred fellowship between a man and a woman. Their union is sacred. And this idea of conflict, lose that. That's white folk. We are people of beat. We are people of rhythm. And with rhythm and beat brought together, it creates harmony. And then with that harmony comes flow. Black men and black women were created by nature with beat and rhythm, that we would know harmony. And whether it's jazz, blues, rhythm and blues, reggae, calypso, gospel, hip-hop, soul, whether it's Nina Simone, Gladys Knight, or Beyonce, all right? We do rhythm, we do beat, we do harmony, not conflict. In our culture, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Conflict and division does not improve people. Anything divided against itself will tear itself apart. We understand this and embrace this as a Negro people. This is important. To understand the nature of Black America is to understand the nature of the Negro mind. We are not white folk. For white people, pleasure and pain might be the primary motivation. They might live for pleasure and live and be defined by their fears of pain, and that's white folk. That's how they get down. But you need to know, as a Negro people, your world is motivated by balance. Balance is our motivation. It falls in line with beat and rhythm. It falls in line with harmony. Balance. Balance isn't something you have to learn. It's part of who we are. Your mind works, always leaning towards balance. That's what logic is. If this, then that. This or that. Cause, effect. 2 plus 2 equals 4. This, to be or not to be. This is balance. Your heart, when it comes to justice, fair play, that's not something you teach. That's not something you learn. It's inherent. You take 2 little bitty children and sit them at a table. Give them 2 bowls of ice cream, 1 apiece. The first thing them kids gonna do, they gonna look at each bowl and say, hey, okay, and make sure they both got enough. Hey, wait a minute. He got more ice cream than me. Why he get more than me? That ain't fair. This isn't something that has to be taught. It's inherent. Boys, we're going to the store. Y'all get in the car. I'm riding the front seat. No, I want to ride in the front seat. Yeah, but I called. All right, man, you called it. That's you right, you called it. All right. Everybody know. You have to be told what's fair. Because it's part of who we are. It's a nature. Your body. You got the heart, you got the mind. What about the body? Are you familiar with equilibrium? Are you familiar with homeostasis? Your body is defined, is designed to balance itself. Whether you're taking oxygen in and out of your lungs, whether your body's controlling its temperature, one side of your brain control the other side of your body. Your physical being is all about balance. Focus is only possible through balance. That's the whole point. It's all balance. Spiritually, the energy of life. The Chinese people call it qi. Qi flows through our body. Balance with yin and the yang. The yin and the yang, the qi. Balance. It's all balance. In nature, the rising of the sun, rising and setting sun to the changing seasons. Everything has its season. Everything has a natural order. And everything is balanced. It's important as Negro people that we not lose ourselves to the European hooliganism of white people. They live for pleasure and pain. We focus on balance. They embrace that conflict as the center of the world. Well, we just bob while we bobbing our heads. Ring ding dong, ring ding 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 dong. Yeah, we just rhythm, flow. This is muy importante. Young people know the difference. Now, you go to different churches and places and they'll tell you that, well, you don't do race, you don't do race this, you don't do race that. That's only if you're uneducated. Because if you take time to study philosophy and logic, philosophy and ethics, social polities, humanities, there is no way you're not going to see the obvious difference between Eurocentric thinking and that thinking that is Afrocentric. When you talk about the Torah or the Gospel of Christ, you're talking about Ethiopians, Hebrews, you're talking about Africans. Their wisdom falls in line with the history and the heritage of Africa. And when you disconnect the scriptures and try to move it somewhere else and make the children of Israel out to be a bunch of Italians in the Vatican or a bunch of Irishmen up in Northern Europe, you lose context. It is important that you don't confuse conflict and pleasure and pain with the motivation of prophets, soothsayers, and men and women of wisdom. It's a totally different world. And as far as relationships is concerned, you need to make up your mind or you're going to limit yourself to European thinking and embrace conflict and live every day in frustration and fear with distrust, or are you going to embrace your black thinking and get yourself in tune with what is healthy, what is natural, what is balance. Yeah. It is important to remember that whether you're talking about psychology, when you go to school in psychology, the core of their thinking is that the quintessential man is a Tasmanian devil who roamed the countryside struggling with humanity. Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, European philosophers who are the core of American government and society, they believe that before formal government, mankind was wild animals. They don't recognize stateless society. They don't recognize that man and woman knew peace and harmony long before they knew constitutions and militaries and emperors and all that. No. That you got to keep your mind right. In the Moor Society, as we explore our Negro history and heritage, pulling yourself out of the mind of white folk and allowing yourself to be engulfed into thinking of black folk is paramount to understanding who and what we are and the life and the beauty of the people from which we come. All right, now, quick summary. When it comes to the negativity, the fear, the pain, and frustration, in relationships, this is not natural. It is not necessary. It only comes with those who lose their mind to white folk thinking. All right? If you embrace the nature of who and what you were created to be, who you were birthed and made to be, then you'll recognize that you were created in a true image of a true and living God, that you were made to be at peace, that you were made to know harmony, and that you were made to be in union and fellowship with a black man. Your job is to shape and sculpture the black man. The black man's job is to give shape and sculpture the black woman. When a black man wants to get in touch with his feminine side, he embraces a black woman. When a black woman wants to embrace her masculine side, she embraces a black man. They give themselves to each other, they submit, they embrace. It is white folk that if a white boy want to get in touch with his feminine side, he puts on a pair of stockings and he shaves his legs and he tries on lipstick. I'm a bitch, I'm a lover, I'm a down, I'm a sinner, I'm a saint. No, man. Leave that with Mel Gibson and what women want. All right? No, women want to get, a white girl want to get in touch with her masculine side. She gonna put on a button-down polo shirt, maybe a dress shirt with a tie, smoke a cigar, put on a man's boxer shorts. She might even close crop her hair and walk around and say, hey, how you doing? Hey. That's white folk. That's not us. We don't do that. Keep that in mind. Right? Now, hit the button at the bottom. Make sure you subscribe to The Making of a More Marriage and Family. We got a lot more to go. Have a good day.